Hello, and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental nerds, Nic and Laura. On today's episode, Nic and I discuss cruises. Nic interviews Rob Young about big data, national parks, and academia. And finally, great apes are not able to differentiate between genres of music, in case you were wondering.
Or even artists, actually. They have no rhythm whatsoever. How cool is that?
Oh,
I mean, it's kind of sad, actually, now that I think about it. Yeah, you're right. Oh.
Well, on that note, hit that music.
Hey everyone, the National Storytelling Network has an open call for proposals for their April 2022 Earth Up conference for stories and science in eco-justice, action, and hope. They are especially looking for interactive panels, workshop, and masterclasses that address issues around eco-justice and effective action in the world. Check them out at storynet.org/earth-up, and they are accepting proposals until Wednesday, January 12th, 2022. Laura and I love doing the show. If you love it too and would like us to keep doing it, we need your help. We can't do the show without our awesome sponsors, so please head on over to www.environmentalprofessionalsradio.com and check out the sponsor form for details. Let's get to our segment. Okay, so you went on a cruise. What was it like? Where'd you go? Why'd you go?
Let's start with why. We always start with why, right?
Yes.
I went on the cruise because... one, I was dying to travel. Two, my sister from another mother invited me with her family. And so I have not been cruising with them for a while. So I really wanted to go. And thirdly, I wanted to use it for my annual planning for my business. So I got a room by myself, first time with a balcony.
Wow.
Really cool.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, it just felt like, oh, your life is starting to make sense. You have a room that's not just like a black hole in the bottom of the ship.
This is fine. Yeah.
Yeah, well, like one of those little round porthole windows.
Right.
Not even. I've only been in the ones that are like a box where you can't tell if it's day or nighttime.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Like being kidnapped, like, am I...
like...
Why am I laughing?
I feel like Schrodinger's room or something. You don't know if Laura's in there or not.
Yeah, it's solitary confinement or something.
So what you're saying is you were Leo and now you're Rose, is what you're telling me. That's what happened. Okay.
I've actually never seen Titanic, which is what I think you're referring to.
Oh my God. How?
There's a little known fact about me. I'm one of the 10%.
3 people. No. It's 3 total people. It's you and 2 other people who are still in comas when it came out. Like that's it.
I was just thinking, what if it was the 3 of us, excluding you, Nic? We were the 3.
Wow, that would be pretty incredible. Except I know Kara's seen it because she's Navy. It's got a boat in it, so she has to see it.
I saw it in the movie theater.
Yeah, I did too. I mean, I was gonna say there may have been a date involved, but yeah, I've seen it. But you haven't seen it either, Chris? Is that what you're trying to tell us?
Oh no, I've definitely seen it.
Okay, all right. See, there you go.
More than once. Against my will.
Yeah. I have a child. Anyone? Yeah, that's right. You haven't seen it. You have no idea what I'm talking about. That's amazing.
So that was why I went on the cruise. Where we went from Port Canaveral to Cozumel, some destination that Carnival owns, and then also a new destination, I believe it is, Roatan.
Right.
The island of Roatan off of Honduras. So it is technically Honduras, but it's not the actual mainland.
Gotcha. I know that from International House Hunters. Yeah.
So. Do you really?
Like that. Yeah. Or like one of the Caribbean ones or something back when that was on Hulu. That was our guilty pleasure, I would say.
Yeah.
Just like, oh yeah, we can't afford to live there or there or there. Maybe Roatan, but no.
Maybe Roatan. It looks just really neat and has such a cool name, Roatan.
It does. Sounds a lot like, what's it, Krakatoan, like the Roanoke.
Oh yeah.
The first thing I thought of actually when you said it, I was like, oh, that's bad.
Same.
Actually. Yeah. So that's 2 against 1, Laura. So sorry. It's a scary name, actually.
That's probably why I like it.
I love that. So what was it like? What was your favorite part?
Oh, the food is always one of the favorite parts of cruising. I mean, that's why people go.
Like the food on the boat, or the food like when you go to your destinations, or
food on the boat. I didn't eat, and aside from the chocolate experience that I went on, I didn't eat any food. Well, no, that's not true. They fed us chicken and red beans and rice, but of course I don't eat chicken, so I just ate beans and rice, but that was good.
Oh, that's funny.
But the ship that I went on, the Carnival Mardi Gras, it is, there's this race for the biggest cruise ships, and it's one of the biggest. It's ginormous. It has like 16 restaurants on it and something stupid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Like a couple of main restaurants and then some other side ones. And then some are just more like equivalent to like a food truck. It's just like a little.
Yeah.
They have one or two things that they have. Yeah. But it's fun. It's lots of fun. I had a good time with my sister and her family. Always nice to do stuff like that, especially around holidays. It was nice to be on the cruise during the holidays too, because there's extra decorations.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I can imagine. And I don't know, you talk about the cruise ship size. I think it's one of those things people don't understand because, like, the show Deadliest Catch, where they take those boats out to do all the crabbing. In my mind, they were the same size as cruise ships, and it's not even close.
Oh my gosh.
Those are like little baby boats.
My room was on the 12th floor, and I sent Mike some pictures from up there. Those boats looked like little toys,
Yeah, they look like cute little babies. And even some of the
other cruise ships, you're like, I'm above the top of that cruise ship.
Yeah, it is. It's like floating cities. I think that's a fair thing to say.
Which is huge. Like Waterworld, because there's also a cruise ship that is starting up.
So Waterworld, but not Titanic.
Exactly. Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
I haven't seen Waterworld, but I just know the premise. I think there's a Waterworld coming because there's a cruise that's starting to travel around the world.
I saw that. Yeah.
Wow.
It's like ridiculously expensive, but it just scares me, the kind of person who would want to do that.
Yeah, I think it only you spend like 297 days in the sea. I think that's something crazy like that.
Stuck with people whose favorite thing is to eat.
Also drink and gamble. You forgot that too. Yeah. So
not so sure about that.
That's why.
And who don't have anything else going on that they could spend this much time.
Yeah. That's really cool. So the places you stopped off, did you do like, how many trips or stops did you have along the cruises? When I went to the one.
3.
There were 3? And so like, did you get to spend like a full day there? Or do you have to is it a couple of hours or?
They were pretty full days. I did not. I got off the ship in Cozumel, did not get off the ship in Mahogany Bay. And then I did the excursion in Roatan.
Gotcha.
But by the time we got to I booked the excursion the night before because I didn't get off at the other 2 and I was starting to feel like a little bit of remorse.
Right.
For
yeah.
I should probably do something.
Yeah,
but I didn't want to go to the beach. I didn't want to. So I had looked through the excursions and I really was kicking myself because there was one that was horses on the beach. And that's the one I really wanted, but I waited too long to sign up for it. And then I was looking again. There was one spot left on the chocolate tour. And I was like, that's for me.
I mean, chocolate is good. It's,
yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, we're glad to have you back. I mean, like I say, it's always more fun when you're around. So glad you had a great time, but please never leave again. And
thanks. Yeah. So you said how many cruises have you been on?
I guess technically it's 2, but I would consider them totally different experiences. One was Galapagos, where you basically, you don't have to do a cruise there, but you really, really should. But they're much smaller boats. It's like a yacht instead of a cruise ship. So that almost doesn't count to me. Technically it still is, but when there's wind outside and you're trying to get to sleep and the boat's rocking and your feet are literally pointing straight up in the air, you're like, you know what? I don't think I'm going to sleep tonight. That doesn't happen on an actual cruise ship. So the other one I did was to Alaska. And so we did.
Both of those are awesome, and I have not done. So that's really fun.
They're really, really cool experiences. I have to say the Galapagos one was the better of the 2. When we did some of the stops in Alaska, that's why I was asking earlier, they were showing up here's your Alaska shirt, and flag, and this is how we all live. I'm like, no, it's not. This is there was one town where it literally looked like Blazing Saddles, where they had the fake town where it's just one board, the front looked the same. You're like, this cannot be real. And, so it was literally a stop for cruise ships more than it was a place where people lived. But still, that being said, I also got to do an excursion where we hiked up a glacier and I hung out over a crevasse, and that was awesome. And the entire time I'm on that trip, my face is just beaming. There's 8 pictures of me isn't this fun? And Lauren's like, yeah, it's fun, but calm down, okay? You need to get outside more, kid. And those excursions were super cool. So we did one of those, and we did a couple as well. So it was just a lot of fun. Like we got to do like a seaplane thing as well and see the tops of glaciers. So that was those two were pretty cool things.
How long? That must have been a long cruise.
It was 7 days, so not super long because like we didn't get to spend a ton of time in any one spot. Juneau we spent the most amount of time in. I didn't realize that you can't drive to Juneau. You have to fly or boat. So that was kind of neat. But yeah, the Mendenhall Glacier was the one we hiked up, and it was really cool. Really cool to do.
Nice. Did you have a balcony?
We did. Yeah, we did. Yeah. So I knew what you meant when you said it. I was like, oh yeah, balcony. But yeah, I went on my first cruise like 2 years ago. I'd never been on one before. So yeah, ours only had 5 restaurants, I think. So, not as big as the one you were on, Laura. Sorry.
Yeah, not as big as the one that's like a movable city.
There's only like 4,000 people, I think, on ours.
That's still a lot.
Yeah, I was going to ask how many people can fit on like one of those larger Carnival ships that's got 16 floors or whatever.
Yeah, that is. I think it's really only like 6,000 plus. The 2 that are bigger, they're really like only 7,000 something.
Oh, okay,
that's I think funny. So 4,000 still seems like a lot for a regular size cruise ship.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I don't even remember which one it was. It was still fun. I had a good time. Yeah. That's what matters. We had like 2 days at sea, and those are almost like, it's very bizarre because you're just like, I guess there's no land anywhere. If you go to the back of the boat and you look out and you're like, yeah, if I fell in here, I'm dead. That's it. Mm-hmm. Like they're not turning this around, And yeah, that's crazy. That was almost haunting, like a horror movie or something, just very eerie.
Yeah, you can definitely spook yourself out.
Yeah.
I would love to have someone on here who works for Carnival or Royal Caribbean or something that does the environmental work.
What do you mean by the environmental work?
They have sustainability issues. And
the sustainability.
Environmental regulations.
In terms of all the waste that they can generate on a single cruise, that kind of stuff.
The waste, the gas, the oil, there's perpetually black smoke coming out of the stacks. I'd like to know if they're monitoring that or where it goes or what it is.
Yeah. Huh. It's probably not a great answer. But I don't know. Honestly, maybe
you don't know.
I'm being biased.
I'd like to know, and I'd like to know what I'm sure there's there has to be new technologies to make this even viable.
Yeah, more efficient. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's challenging anyway to have a cruise. And having
that's a really interesting question because
you
got like international waters and you're not like a stationary emission source, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So how does the regulations play when you go from one country to another and all that stuff? I think there could be a lot of interesting stuff there. Plus, I just want to know for my own decision making on whether I go on cruises again, because there is part of me that's like, should you be doing this?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I understand. Yeah. I don't know though.
Or is this somehow against?
Aren't we an environmental show? We should know. Yeah, we should really be.
We're interested. That's a start.
Yes, that's true.
There's a ship. I think it might still be. I think it's the last working coal-fired vessel. It makes like regular trips from Manitowoc, Wisconsin, to I think Ludington, Michigan. So it just crosses Lake Michigan, kind of across the short axis there. But I think they've got some sort of special permission or provision in place so that they can keep emitting coal
they've been
from a coal stack.
Cool.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it sounds so fascinating. But yeah, just kind of to your point, Laura, is it something I should go on? Probably not. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. So let's get someone on here who we can all make educated decisions about this on our next cruise.
Yeah, but for now, let's talk to Rob about parks.
Yes, let's do that.
Hello and welcome back to EPR. Today we have Dr. Robert Young from Western Carolina University on the show to talk coastlines. Welcome, Rob.
Hey, Nick.
It looks like you started out your career pursuing an English and literature degree at the Great School of Virginia Tech. We're super proud of that. Then you switched gears to geology. So how did that come to be?
Yeah, well, I spent 3 years at Virginia Tech as an English major, took a couple of geology classes and really enjoyed it. Somewhere around the end of my junior year, my dad got sick and I had to move back home to the Tidewater area of Virginia and ended up having to transfer to William and Mary. And I had completed enough credits for the English major, so I had to figure out something to do with the 60 hours I needed to complete. So I thought, hey, well, might as well finish the geology major too, just for fun. And I guess that's where I ended up.
Wow. And so how did you go from geology to coastal resources? How did that happen?
Well, the geology I've always been interested in has been the sort of the soft version of geology, right? Don't ask me to identify a rock. I've always been more interested in sediments and coastal and marine geology. I mean, I grew up on the Chesapeake Bay and the York River, digging clams out of the sand and running a seine net to catch shrimp and flounder. And so as I learned what it meant to be a geologist in the very broad sense of the word, it was the modern processes that always interested me. And I think a big part of the reason for that was also because I saw that as being, maybe a little bit more relevant and a little bit less ivory tower. if you're dealing in modern processes, then you can do, well, the kind of work that I'm doing today, which is hazards and planning and directly engage with communities in trying to bring science to decision making.
Yeah, that's just a great segue to my next question then. So what kind of research do you do and how do you bridge those gaps?
Well, we could talk for a long time about that, so I'll try and make that fairly brief. So I direct a center called the Program for the Study of Developed Shorelines. It was founded at Duke in the mid-1980s. It's now a joint venture between Western Carolina University and Duke University. And our mission is twofold. We do basic coastal research. We've gotten my university's largest National Science Foundation grant. So we look at coastal processes, coastal storm impacts, sea level rise impacts, coastal restoration, the science of all of those things. That's a big part of what we do. But maybe the even more important part of our mission is to communicate that science to decision makers at all levels. So, we really get excited about the applied aspects of coastal science and sedimentology in, a whole variety of different ways and settings, either engaging directly with individual communities, municipalities, homeowners groups, up to advising the state, local, federal government. So the main project that we have going on at the moment, we've been funded for many years by the National Park Service to develop the protocol that the Park Service is using to attach a vulnerability score to every single asset in every coastal park in America. So everything from the Statue of Liberty to an outhouse in Sitka, Alaska, we are using the protocol that we've developed to put in a vulnerability score on that asset, that building, that road, that, docks, piers, sometimes trails. And, that's really where we like to work, is in that nexus between science and management, which, I would imagine is sort of right up the alley of most of your membership.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually the reason I wanted to have you on the show. That particular project is extremely fascinating. The work that you do is really, really, like you say, right in the middle. And I love that. So can you tell us a little bit about, how do you develop a ranking system for these parks? I mean, obviously it's really hard, in my mind at least, to compare an outhouse to the Statue of Liberty. So how do you guys level that out?
Well, there are a million products out there today that people call vulnerability assessments. And to us, assessing the vulnerability of the built environment involves two things. The first one is exposure. So just take a building, for example. Is a building in a particular park, or even we've done this for municipalities as well, using the same protocol. Is the building exposed to a particular hazard? Is it exposed to coastal erosion, sea level rise, flooding, any hazard that's mappable? That's the exposure aspect. So the first part of doing any vulnerability assessment and the work that we do for the Park Service is just to determine what buildings, what roads, what assets are exposed to particular hazards, and sort of adding all of that up for an overall exposure score. The part that many, many entities don't include in their, quote, vulnerability assessments, unquote, is what we call sensitivity. So it's not just when you're looking at a building's vulnerability, it's not just will the water get there, it's what happens when the water gets there.
Right.
And the sensitivity is much more difficult to quantify because you can't go on some national database. There's no NOAA website that shows you the first finished floor elevation of every building in the United States of America. You can pull up lots of maps of sea level rise and flood hazards and things like that. And that's great, but that's just exposure. If you really want to understand vulnerability, you need to have detailed information about that built environment that tells you its sensitivity to those individual hazards. And so to us, that's the tricky part, right? So that means field work. It means pulling documents about when something was constructed, to what hurricane code, what elevation is the site, what elevation is the first finished floor. All of this goes into our sensitivity analysis. And you combine that with the exposure score to get an overall vulnerability score for that particular asset. The reason it's very rarely done is because that sensitivity information is often difficult to get. It's not a desktop exercise.
Right.
It's time consuming. That is what vulnerability is. If you don't have the sensitivity side of the story, then you're just making maps of where the water is going to be, which is useful, but it's only half of what you need to know when you advance from understanding the vulnerability to trying to make decisions about how you deal with that vulnerability.
Yeah, and it's a great question. It's a great system there, and I love that you're bringing that up too. And like, it's got to be an intense amount of data that you have to manage on the front end. And I want to get to how you determine recommendations in a second, but how do you manage the data?
Lots of hard drives and cloud storage. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the most useful things that we end up doing for whoever the client is when we're doing these vulnerability assessments is the fact that we gather all of this hazards information and sensitivity information and put it into one place. And so our final product involves both an ArcGIS database with all of this information. We also put it all into Excel spreadsheets because there are a lot of managers who still work primarily from Excel spreadsheets.
Right.
You have to meet the client where they work. And often that's not with maps or GIS. So if you want the information that you have produced, if you want your vulnerability assessments to be used every single day, you need to try and present that information in a way that works with the way they manage assets. So the National Park Service, for example, has an asset management database, and we're integrating all of our information directly into that asset management database. So they can sort the final data in a lot of different ways. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the final product for each park is frequently a lot of GIS data that is, depending on the capabilities of the client or the capabilities of the park, we may deliver it to the park. We may deliver it to a regional office that has a GIS specialist who can manage that information when we're done. We also present a final written report that has summaries of all of this information, which is what most of the folks at the park will end up looking at to get a high level assessment of the vulnerability. And one thing I should probably mention, and if you're the National Park Service and you have to make decisions on a regional or a national level about resilience spending, you need to be able to compare the vulnerability scores from one park to another.
Right.
So another very important aspect of the protocol that we've set up is we try to use national data sets wherever available for things like sea level rise, for the slosh model runs for storm surge flooding, FEMA data sets, so that all of the data that we're using from park to park is being produced in a similar way from a similar source. And that allows you as a regional manager or a national manager to compare a vulnerability score from the Everglades with a vulnerability score that comes from Cape Cod or something along those lines. So it's also, I think, really important to standardize a process like this as much as possible so that you can compare scores across parks.
Yeah. And have you ever had any challenges with that standardization? Has anyone ever said, well, you can't compare those two things? It's impossible.
Well, there are some challenges in data availability that makes the ideal that I just described sometimes a little bit difficult, especially when you're dealing with wilderness areas in national parks. I mean, FEMA doesn't create flood maps in places where there's no infrastructure. So there can be some challenges where we have to fill in some of the data gaps ourselves. But, we do our best to try and keep it as consistent as possible. And honestly, at the end of the day, if you are an asset manager in a municipality, a county, or the National Park Service, you don't have all the money in the world. And you're going to focus your planning and your energy on sort of on the end members of the assessment, right? You're going to focus on the things that are the most vulnerable. And you might set aside thinking about the things that are completely not vulnerable or at least moderately vulnerable. So we have a very high level of confidence in the end members of our assessment, which is where most of the focus ends up being. If you try and parse the middle with scores that have decimal points or something like that, I mean, honestly, we're sometimes asked to do that, and we can produce decimal point scores, but to me, they're sort of meaningless. But at the end of the day, we're usually starting the resilience planning with the things that are in the most trouble. And that end of the vulnerability assessments, we have an extremely high level of confidence in our ability to compare those across the region and even across the nation.
Yeah, and you actually brought up another great point that I wanted to get at too. So when you're developing your recommendations, you have the score in front of you, and like you said, you could do it to decimal points, but that's really not. It's kind of maybe that's missing the mark a little bit. But what do you do? Like, how do you use those numbers to develop your recommendations? I'm sure it's not like a one size fits all, but what do you actually do when you get the data? How do you develop recommendations from it?
Well, at the moment, from the work that we've done to date, we have been using these vulnerability assessments to assess individual parks, sort of one asset at a time as problems arise, which is not the ideal way to do it. I mean, ultimately, you want information like this, especially with this big picture of vulnerability that we're creating, to be used for big picture planning at the regional and national level. The Park Service is at this very moment trying to figure out how that's going to happen. So there are ongoing conversations going on within the National Park Service right now to try and develop how that strategic decision making is going to happen. Like so many other entities within federal, state, and local government, there's a decent amount of federal cash that's coming down the pike for resilience and infrastructure. Park Service has tons of deferred maintenance, lots of things that they need to fix and improve. And so now that we have developed this process for scoring the vulnerability, what we're really working on with the Park Service right now is how we actually translate that into wise decision making. So that part of the process has not been fully fleshed out yet, but hopefully will be by this summer.
That's awesome. That's really great to hear. I was thinking too, there's also got to be something, especially as a lot of this is new. You're doing a lot of really groundbreaking stuff that hasn't been done before. So have you seen, as you started this process from where it is now, what's changed, I guess, over that time for like coastal resources in general, but for your project in particular?
Well, when you're doing vulnerability assessments and you've been doing them for years, there are a lot of things that change all the time. Sea level rise projections, for one thing, have sort of gone up and then gone down a little bit, and now we're back up. And, you have to be able to deal with those projections in a sensible way, or at least explain how you're handling all of that to everybody. We have been working with the Park Service. This is our third different administration, and they all have different ways of looking at vulnerability and different ways that they would like you to talk about what you're assessing.
I'm sure.
And that can be interesting and sometimes challenging. I will say that it hasn't stopped the work at all, which is a good thing. Having the National Park Service as a client is wonderful because it's, in general, one of the more popular federal agencies.
Right.
And certainly one that really takes science-based decision-making to heart. So that has made our job a little bit easier, for sure.
Yeah, and that collaborative nature, I think, it's something we haven't really seen on the show or talked about on the show much. So was it something that you approached the Park Service with? Like, hey, I have this idea. Did they come to you? How did you guys start this program?
Well, they did come to us, but we've had a record of working with the National Park Service on a wide variety of projects going back 20 plus years. I did a sabbatical leave in Olympic National Park working on the Elwha River Restoration Project, which is still one of the best things I've ever done in my life. So, I have a long working relationship with the National Park Service. I live in the mountains of North Carolina. I'm 15 minutes from the entrance to Great Smoky Mountains National Park. We have done wetland evolution projects and all sorts of sort of Holocene landscape evolution work in Great Smokies. So this particular project of vulnerability assessment just really flowed out of a lot of the work that we partnered with the National Park Service on over the years. But we feel incredibly fortunate to be able to do this work with NPS. I mean, it's such an honor to play any role in helping the National Park Service protect our nation's natural and cultural heritage, right? Which is what this is all about. So we just love it. We're really thankful that we have a chance to do this work.
Oh, that's great to hear. So we love to ask professionals on the show about their field experiences, and maybe this is the one you might want to share, but do you have any memorable field stories that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to choose.
Right. It's an unfair question. It really.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 58, so I've been doing this for about 30 years. I guess there's a couple that come to mind. As a graduate student at Duke University, the very first year I was at Duke, Hurricane Hugo was approaching the coast of South Carolina. This is 1989. And my major professor, Orrin Pilkey, sent me and a couple of other graduate students down to South Carolina to collect pre-storm data on Hurricane Hugo with almost no guidance on how to stay safe and not die.
Right.
So we spent the day collecting all of that data as Hurricane Hugo was heading towards the coast of South Carolina. That night, we went what we thought was far enough inland. We went to Florence, South Carolina, and checked into the Holiday Inn that's right on I-95. So I called him that night and told him that, no problem. We were in Florence. We weren't on the coast anymore. Well, Hurricane Hugo was a very powerful storm and moving really fast. And it went right over the top of our Holiday Inn, even though we were 50 miles inland from where Hugo hit the coast, and just ripped the roof to shreds, broke the sliding glass door. It's right on I-95, so it had one of those giant highway signs that came down across the parking lot and smashed a whole bunch of cars. We had no power, water, or ability to make phone contact that next morning. But all of the media that were coming down from DC and New York to cover Hurricane Hugo, like Florence was the first place they hit because it was right on I-95. So they're broadcasting all of these terrible scenes from Florence, and I had no way of contacting my family.
Oh my gosh!
So yeah, I learned a lot that day. It was the longest night of my life, and when people are hesitant to evacuate from hurricanes, if you have to ride through one like that, it really breaks you of that desire, I think, to try and ride out the storm, because we were terrified that whole night, and it seemed like it lasted for weeks.
Right.
But I don't think universities can get away with sending graduate students out on missions quite like that anymore. I know I wouldn't.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, it's like you say, it's a great life lesson, a great life experience. I think a lot of times that happens with storms in general. If I've had to do tornado recovery, disaster recovery efforts, and it's brutal. It's absolutely powerful. And so that's a great story.
It absolutely is. Yeah. I mean, I don't ride out the storms anymore, but I was down south of New Orleans after Ida just a couple of months ago. And the media had all left because they were like, oh, well, New Orleans did great. The levees helped.
Right.
But it was just crushing to go down into southern Louisiana, where people had lost both their homes and their boats, their shrimp boats, their livelihoods. These are communities that, it's going to take years for them to heal. And, we haven't even really repaired Louisiana from the impacts from Hurricane Laura and Delta from the year before. If you go to Lake Charles, I mean, it's still just a mess down there. And, I think we really do forget the trauma that can be inflicted on these communities in events like that when we walk away. I mean, I think too often, when we think about words like resilience, we have these happy visions of raising homes and protecting communities from events so that they can stay in place. But the trauma and the heartbreak that comes from communities that are in the path of disasters like that it's not a small thing. And I really don't think that we factor that into our vision of resilience planning enough.
Oh yeah. And it's a great point. And you're absolutely right. I don't think many people know that disaster recovery is a years-long effort from one event. And when you have a significant one, Katrina is, 5-10 years later, there are still challenges. So that's a really, really good point. Along those lines, talking about resiliency and coastal resources, how do we plan better for that? Another unfair question, I know.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, I could write a dissertation on that. I generally think we're failing right now. We spend a tremendous amount of money, but I just don't see major improvements in our coastal resilience. I mean, let's take a look at Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
They have spent tens of billions of dollars. They plan to spend more on resilience projects all over southern Louisiana. And they're still being just hammered and wiped out by storms.
Yeah.
And, I think that we're promising a little bit too much. And it's not a bad thing to have high aspirations about what you can do for folks, but it's even better to make sure that you're being realistic.
Yeah.
So in Louisiana, they've built dozens of miles of barrier island to reduce storm surge. Is it reducing storm surge? I don't really think so. So, I think we really need an honest assessment of what can and can't be accomplished with the resilience dollars that we're spending. And I also think that we need to do a much better job of making the way we spend money more fair from an economic perspective. We spend a tremendous amount of money in coastal resort and oceanfront communities holding beaches in place in front of investment property.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you step inland to people who are actually living in primary residences, we often offer those folks buyouts, or maybe if they're lucky, we'll offer to raise their homes. It's a totally different approach. So with wealthy folks living in coastal resort communities out on the barrier islands, we offer them protection of the property value for their investment homes.
Mm-hmm.
But when we step inland to people who are living in more modest dwellings, typically the cost analysis that agencies like the United States Army Corps of Engineers does, it doesn't work. The properties are not expensive enough to warrant federal dollars for protection. So we walk away from those communities. And that part is really frustrating to me. You can look at places in New Jersey and New York and Horry County, South Carolina, where on the ocean front, we're spending a tremendous amount of money protecting properties and property values. And then when you get inland to places where folks are blue collar, working class, living in their primary residences, we don't offer them the same level of protection. Now, should we be is a totally different question. I'm not suggesting that we can protect every home and every property in the United States of America. We absolutely cannot do that. But the difference in approach to me is glaring in how in communities that could probably be paying for their own protection of their investment property, we spend a lot of federal money providing that protection. And in communities of lesser means that barely have the capacity to go after pots of money for resilient spending, we have a completely different approach to the resilient solutions that we're offering to them. And I find that to be really problematic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's one of those things. Do you see that as, is that something that we need to have is it a mindset change and a policy change? Is it just policy that needs to update? What's a solution? How do we gear ourselves towards coming up with a solution to that issue?
I think it's so many things, but to a large degree, it's better oversight of the federal spending. We don't really have a national plan for where spending is in the federal interest or where it's not. We spend a tremendous amount of money. A lot of it is really reactionary after events, off budget in disaster relief bills.
Yeah.
And, we give money to the Corps and then we say, come back and tell us what you did. Like Congress has, to a large degree, completely shirked their responsibility for oversight, detailed oversight of a lot of this resilience spending. So it ends up being guided by Office of Management and Budget and by the Corps in ways that just don't provide a real national perspective. I think that that's a big part of the problem. And then we have agencies that at least say that they're handcuffed in how they spend the money, like the Corps of Engineers. They spend a tremendous amount of money, but it has to be storm damage averted, and they have a cost analysis that requires the alleged benefits of the project be greater than the costs. And the only benefit that they're allowed to consider is property damage reduction. So if your house is $10 million, you got much better chance of having it protected by federal dollars than if your house costs $120,000. And to me, that's just an absurd way for us as a nation to be spending that money. And, I really question whether that reflects our values as American citizens. Is this our value system that we're going to spend our resilience dollars based entirely on property value?
Right.
And if you can't meet that property value threshold, then we have the second suite of options for you. So I think that it's a monumental issue that starts with leadership at the federal level and more engagement by Congress. But in all honesty, we all know that Congress really doesn't legislate anymore. They have trouble doing basic oversight, and all they want to do is spit at each other. So, I have to say, I'm not terribly optimistic of getting the solution that we really need, which is that legislative solution, legislative oversight, people coming together to provide meaningful guidance on what our values are as American citizens when we're spending federal dollars. And we don't have that outlined.
No, we don't. And it's one of those things that I think a lot of people, you hear terms like environmental justice and then how does it actually show up? And this is an example of that. You're talking about disadvantaged communities that if you explain it to somebody practically, like, hey, we should help people who don't have the means and resources to help themselves. They'll say, yeah, sure. And it's like, okay, well, great. Let's do it. And they're like, oh, well, okay. I don't know about that. But, you said I'm totally for it, but I'm not for it, and I think there's a challenge that we have to kind of overcome in that way.
Yeah. And I think, I think it's important to remind people that this isn't welfare that we're handing out, or I'm suggesting that we hand out just to people who don't have the means to help themselves. Because the fact of the matter is we hand that money out regularly to people who do have the means to help themselves.
Yes.
So this is just a matter of fairness in offering people similar solutions or handling these communities in a consistent way. That's really all it is. And when the only thing that you can look at when you're doing an economic analysis is property values, well, then you end up with one solution.
Right. Exactly. And we could talk about this for a while, I'm sure. But we're getting closer to the end of our time. I did want to ask one question that hasn't come up a lot on the show. So you're doing work with governments, you're doing a lot of consulting work too, but you're also in the academic realm. So how did you choose academia versus private industry?
Gosh, I don't know if I ever chose academia. I just, never wanted to get a real job. The only thing I could think of doing as an undergraduate was to get a master's degree. When I finished that, the only thing I could think of doing was get a PhD. When I finished my PhD, the only thing I could imagine doing was becoming a professor. I never really thought about it too hard. But you're absolutely right. The work that we do right now as a center, we're acting a lot more like a consulting firm than we are as an academic entity. We hardly ever publish in the peer-reviewed literature anymore. Just one, because I don't have the time, because we're very project-driven and we're too busy doing all of that stuff. But more and more, I just feel like it's meaningless. Mm-hmm. Like what I want are case studies, action, Yeah. So we just worked with a number of different partners. We worked with a design engineering firm, an architecture firm, and a couple of other groups to do some flood mapping and planning in Horry County, South Carolina. We developed a completely new way to map flood risk in the floodplain and helped convince Horry County to adopt a 3-foot freeboard over the base flood elevation in a very pro-development, very red county in South Carolina.
Oh,
it's
wow.
like one of the most important things I think that we've ever done. And that's the kind of work that really excites us. We often talk as a group about whether we should be a consulting firm instead of a center within an academic institution. But, right now we have a tremendous amount of freedom to work with a wide variety of different partners. And it would be hard to give that up. I mean, there are some times that I wish that I could pay my staff a lot more, and the state of North Carolina limits what I can pay them. That's the downside.
Yeah.
But the upside is the way that we can do the work. And because all I'm trying to do is cover staff salaries, we're really cheap. And so we are able to work with a lot of partners in a way that gives them a product that is affordable within their particular budget. And so I think that allows us to help people that we might not otherwise be able to help. And I hope what I'm saying doesn't come across as being dismissive of the bulk of your audience.
No.
Because a big number of the projects that we're doing, we're working directly with other environmental consulting firms or other consulting entities. But, it allows us a certain balance that we wouldn't otherwise be able to have, and pots of money that we can go after that we wouldn't be able to go after if we were just working as a private consulting firm.
Yeah. Oh, that's really great, though. I think that's fantastic. And I love the idea of, having more than one solution for problems that come up. So that's really great to hear. People may have questions or some may be interested in getting in touch with you. Where can people reach out?
Well, I'm pretty easy to find if you just Google Rob Young and add geologist, or you can look up my center program for the study of developed shorelines. You can also very easily find me on LinkedIn, which is where I communicate a lot of the issues that we're talking about here today. So please connect with me on LinkedIn or follow the program for the study of developed shorelines on Facebook. I should add one last little thing quickly. I am really blessed that my university is happy with the model for how we operate that I just described to you. So Western Carolina University has been very good to us in allowing us to sort of fund ourselves in the way that we do and to work on these particular projects with the professional staff. So that's made everything that we do pretty easy and very productive. But yeah, please get in touch with me. We're always looking for great partners and always happy to help folks out. If your question is quick and simple, we do a lot of pro bono work. We're sort of like an agricultural extension agent for the coast. We like to help people solve problems.
That is really cool. Well, is there anything else you'd like to discuss before we let you go?
Yeah, I really can't think of anything else that wouldn't involve a several-minute conversation.
Right.
So yeah. No, I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate the opportunity to chat about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's our show. I want to thank Rob so much for joining us today. It was really fun to have him on. A lot of great, interesting information. It really is such a pleasure to do this show. Really happy to be back for 2022. Looking forward to another great series of episodes coming up. And as always, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Thank you so much for listening. See you, everybody.